You are listening to Zero E Michigan with Carl Bloss and Larry Hudson. On this show, we try to explore and simplify what's happening with electric vehicles, energy generation, and zero emissions topics with a focus on our home state of Michigan. Together with our guests, we demystify topics related to driving electric in Michigan and how you can select, charge, maintain, and get the maximum value out of your EV. Welcome to Zero E Michigan. I'm Carl Bloss.
And I'm Larry Hudson.
And today we are recording our inaugural podcast. We are not going to do intros right now because we did that in a separate episode. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest, Luke Wilson. I met Luke through the West Michigan EV and plug-in enthusiasts Facebook page. And then after that, he and I connected and we did a newsletter story for the Consumers Energy EV e-newsletter, and I got to find out about some cool stuff about him, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to let him talk. So Luke, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Luke Wilson. I am a new EV enthusiast. We ordered and picked up our Mustang Mach E in February of 2022. So we've owned it for 10 months now. And one mild correction, Carl, I think I found you through the exuberant staff at Consumers Energy who said, you have questions about EVs, you should talk to this guy. And then they gave me your direct line. And then you invited me to the forum. So I thought that was really cool.
Good. Well, thanks for correcting me. At my age, my memory's starting to go a little bit. Nonetheless, we've seen each other at numerous events now. National Drive Electric Week. I see Luke's beautiful bright red Mustang in a number of places. So today's topic for the podcast is road trips. And so the reason I brought Luke on is shortly after he got his car, he posted on the forum that he was about to embark on a trip to the Atlantic coast. And I thought, wow, for somebody that just got an EV and it's not a Tesla that doesn't have access to the supercharger network, that's pretty bold. And then Luke also said, well, you're in the data analysis space. So, and I'm an engineer and I love numbers and graphs and spreadsheets. So I thought this is going to be good. So that's why I thought, let's talk a little bit about your road trip and how you even thought about doing that with your EV, because you still have combustion cars, so you could have done it in a different vehicle, but you chose to do it that way. So walk us a little bit through your thought process of what made you take that vehicle.
Yeah, well, I'll keep it as brief as possible, but our family, we are an avid road trip family. I'm originally from the West Coast, and so we've driven 7 times across from Michigan back to the Pacific Northwest and down into California. We had a unique situation in our family where after COVID, we just needed to get out of the house. And it was actually at my wife's recommendation after we purchased it that she said, we should make a road trip out east and let's do it in the electric vehicle. And I hit the pause button immediately. I said, I'm not ready for that. I don't think we should try to do that. I think we'll be frustrated. But she pushed on and said, no, let's look for an adventure. I'm willing to try this. And honestly, I think we were just looking to shake things up a little bit. And so that's how it started. And then the planning began.
Well, that's awesome to have support from your family, because I've heard the opposite too. Sometimes it's, well, gee, I want to take the EV, but then your spouse is like, I don't want to be sitting in a charger for hours, right? There's one of those myths that you're going to be there for a very, very long time, which doesn't turn out to be the case. I find I plug in the car, I go into the store, the restaurant, you use the restroom, I get a cup of coffee, and by the time I come out, maybe I've got 5 or 10 minutes left to charge, but most of the time the car's done before we are. So how did you do the planning process? I mean, did you use, I think Ford has some capabilities on screen. There's an app. I'm not familiar with the Ford ecosystem. For me, I use different tools. I'll use something like PlugShare or Better Route Planner. But what did you use to kind of figure out where you were going to charge?
Yeah, I used all of the above. I used Ford Pass, I used PlugShare, I used Electrify America, I used a Better Route Planner at your recommendation. The only frustrating thing, and I'm a cheap guy, when I tried to use a better route planner, it required that I paid for a premium subscription to cast it onto my CarPlay, and I decided I'll just keep it on my phone for now, and I can manage it from there. But I used everything. But just to clarify, you know, we're a road trip family that doesn't just know the destination and then embark. So we've done a first few trips that way, and they weren't as enjoyable. And in time, I think our planning evolved, even with an ICE vehicle, to plan our stops, know where we're going to stay, make sure lodging are available, and map out how long our drive is going to be. And with that, that philosophy, it guided, how much or how far we should drive, especially knowing that we needed to bake in some charging time and probably some ways to mitigate if there were problems with the charger. So not try to overextend ourselves. So, but a lot of that came just from self-learning and inquiry, and also watching a lot of YouTube vlogs on their planning. So I really just doused myself in information before we committed to our trip.
And so how did it go overall? Any pitfalls, any places where you needed to reach back to the plan B? By the way, I do the same thing, right? I map out my day's drive, and then for the wherever I stay overnight, I look for a level 2 charger where I can charge overnight, which maybe we need a separate thread on that. But to me, that's huge, right? So that you wake up in the morning, just like at home, your car's full. So you don't need to go out and immediately charge your car as you're leaving the hotel. But with that in mind, any places where the whole plan kind of broke apart, right? They say the plans always fall apart after the first shot's fired. So
Yeah.
Right, and I hear too that the Ford, like, integrating with the Chargers, was there some challenges there?
Yeah, so lots of good questions there. So when we bought the vehicle, we hadn't planned to do any DC fast charging. I mean, our lifestyle was just going to use a level 2 at the home. It was going to fit our needs. The first hiccup, if it's a hiccup, was my experience with Electrify America as we headed east. And as you travel, and I use Ford Pass because it has a lot of really nice little widgets to tell you what it estimates all natively in the car. I just wanted to use that. Even though I had in the Ford Pass, you can plan your trip. And each day I actually said, I want to go from this place to this place. Just give me your best recommendation. And I planned each of those segments so that I could just pull them up right on my car, and it would bring it from your planner in the Ford Pass app, which I thought was pretty good. It wasn't reliable, at least picking the same chargers I thought it had picked before, but it was okay. And so as we left, I see this blue orb around my user interface telling me, hey, this is your zone, right? This is how far you can go. And I knew that once I passed halfway, that was the point of no return. This is when things are going to get dicey. I've never done this before. And so we hit an Electrify America, I forget exactly where, in mid-Michigan. And I first connected, and I remembered all of the videos that I'd watched of other people using it and their hassles. And sure enough, I experienced my first hassle where I followed the procedures on Electrify America and it didn't start. And so then I ended up doing the opposite, which I remember someone else doing that. And then it started. And I was still learning about how it would sync up with my Ford Pass, because Ford has a preferred relationship when you purchase the vehicle where you receive 250 kilowatt hours to be used at Electrify America. So thankfully, I was able to enjoy much of that bucket on this trip.
right. So the instructions tell you on the EA chargers, plug in first, then you do all the transactions. But the reality is it's actually a little bit more flexible. Of course, the other thing is you got to watch it. Sometimes the app doesn't properly sync with the stations. You got to figure out which one. In fact, they're the ones for those looking on video. That's what's behind me. And up here, there's a little code. So you got to figure out which one it is, because they typically have two that are 150 kilowatt and two that are 350 kilowatt, which if your car can't handle 350, it's polite to let somebody else use that. But it's interesting what you said about the Ford Pass. And so 250 miles, just for those that don't speak EV, what does that, or 250 kilowatt hours of energy, what does that translate into on your Mustang into miles about?
Well, depending on the season, of course, in the summer and what driving you're doing. Of course, if you're driving in town, your range is extended beyond that if you're driving on the highway and what speeds you're driving. So if I were to, when you're using a DC fast charger, you're obviously probably not in your local area. You're on a road trip typically, or your day requires you to travel long distances. So in that case, you're probably traveling more at highway speeds. So I might be getting closer to 3 miles per kilowatt hour for my model of car. Of course, there are other cars that are more
Sure.
efficient. And if you're driving a Lightning, then you're not getting anywhere near that.
Sure. Yeah.
So
But so you're
probably
saying the
750.
freebie, yeah, okay. Yeah, the freebie you got is about 750 miles. And how much of that trip did that cover? Was that your first trip where you were using DC fast charging?
That was.
Okay. So in the end, and I know you love data and stats, approximate fuel cost for that trip and about how many miles?
So we traveled 2,660 miles, not to be exact. And I'm pulling that out from memory because I'm a numbers guy. That's the kind of work that I do. And after all promotional charging, which I was able to deduct 215 kilowatt hours of energy, complimentary Ford, and several level 2 charging options that were available to me at our lodging. It cost me about $149, even including our home charging back at the house to bring us back to our 90%.
So that's pretty compelling compared to taking a gas vehicle. Now you got the freebie, but so the math would look a little bit different if you had to pay out of pocket. But kind of what I've looked at in the past is it's still cheaper than buying gas these days, even now that gas has dropped back below $4 a gallon.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I put a video on our channel yesterday where I went through the math of 31 cents per kilowatt hour, which is about 2.5 times what you would pay at home versus a gas vehicle, and it still comes out cheaper. So yeah, that's pretty amazing.
What about, I was curious with the Mach E, what was it kind of blends in with the rest of the cars. How was the, people asking you questions factor? Are you able to pull over, not even be noticed, or just curious about that?
Yeah, so what I hadn't, driving long distances in a nice car, and comparing it or contrasting it to the EV, I was engaged in so many more conversations. So I could have been antisocial and been the typical person at the gas pump and not engage someone, but the car attracted attention.
Okay.
So I met a lot of new people across the region as we stopped at charging spots. And honestly, many of them were learning too. I remember at one stop, there was a new Volvo owner, and he had said I was looking at getting a Mach E. But we ended up going with this, and we were talking about the UI and how at the time, I believe it only supported Android Auto. And he shared a lot of compliments on the car and asked a lot of questions. And I've shared this with you, Carl, and others before. What was interesting is those conversations, and then of course embedding the natural breaks and fuel, eating and stretching, because we want it to be a relaxing trip. Many times we exceeded our 80%, state of charge because we were enjoying our time at the stop, meeting new people.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome, especially when you have one of those halo cars or a new car. For those listening on audio behind me, I have a Rivian. I stopped at the Electrify America station in Normal, Illinois. And yeah, I immediately went out and talked to the guy. So there's always this camaraderie among EV drivers. But that's a great segue into another kind of line of questioning that I was going to go down, cadence. So it's kind of the anatomy of a daily EV road trip. You typically start out the day with 100% charge if you can from home or from a hotel if you've selected one that has level 2 charging. So your first leg really has the most range, and then after that, you typically run the battery down to, I'm going to say, 10 to 20%. I know Tesla kind of maps that out to get you there with 20%. And then you charge, but you don't charge to 100%. So how did you decide what level to choose? You mentioned the 80%, and I know that's kind of a recommendation because at that point, DC fast charging slows down. But did you typically try to shoot for the 80%, or did you just go for just what was needed to get to the next charger? And what's the time impact? So I'm just kind of thinking the charge and drive and charge and drive cadence. So how did that work for you?
Yeah. So if I was driving by myself, I probably would have had a more rigid driving pattern and try to extend my range and my stops because you're by yourself. But this trip that we had made was with my wife and one of our kids. And there's just going to be a variety of needs that come out of that trip. Many times, regardless of how far you can go, the human body is going to say, "I need to stop for one reason or another." And so, again, out of our own philosophy of road tripping, anytime one person needed to stop, we all took advantage of the stop, and that included the car. So, thankfully, the route that we had taken, so over going to Maine, we decided to go through Ontario and Quebec and through the Queen's Highway. I think if I'm saying that correctly, they have a relatively solid infrastructure of Electrify Canada, Circuit Electrek is what they might call it, and others that are available. And so anytime we need to stop, I just paired that up with finding a charger there. And of course, most charging stations usually had some amenities to use the restroom or get food or do whatever. So many times our needs interrupted any planning and we just charged. So even if it was at 50%, we'd charge up to 80. Or if we knew we needed to stop somewhere else, maybe we'll charge to 70 and then we'll continue on until we get somewhere else. So again, that main trip, we just treated it more like an adventure, which I know for some of the people, you go, my destination is the only focus of my mind. We're just going to, bullet train all the way there and try to get there as fast as we can. And I think we were set up for success to just be flexible that way.
That's great. Cool. Let me switch over to Larry for a minute because so he's got in the picture behind him is a Chevy Volt, and so he's a plug-in hybrid driver, which that changes the dynamics a little bit. And I've done something similar. My daughter has a 2015 Chevy Volt, and we've caravanned, and the trip that we're about to embark on is with both a Tesla and the Volt. So it'll be interesting to see how those dynamics play out. But Larry, tell me a little bit about road trip dynamics on a plug-in hybrid. First of all, what is a plug-in hybrid for those that don't know what it is?
So the Chevy Volt they're the rare, right? There was the Volt, the BMW had a little mini gas-powered generator on board, and I think the Fisker, but it had all kinds of problems. I'm not sure if everything. So there was just those three that are electric cars with gas generators. And I think the Volt was the most successful one. I loved it. That's my first electric. They just weren't on my radar. I'm a gearhead, been working on big motors all my life, loud pipes, loud cars, loud bikes. Anyways, the Volt, I was invited because I was converting a diesel truck to run on vegetable oil. So I was in alternative fuels. And a guy up in Kalamazoo knew me and knew another kid that started Green Earth, Michigan. And they were putting chargers all over Kalamazoo. So back in 2012, Kalamazoo had more chargers, I think, than any other city in America because of this young kid. And I just happened to be there. And they had gotten 3 brand new Volts to take to one of the openings at one of the hospitals where he got grants to help them get chargers put in. And so he needed a driver. And that was my first experience. Got to sit in a brand new Volt. I do remember seeing some of the pictures. I don't know if you guys do, of when that first came out, the prototype looked a little bit more like a Camaro, just really awesome looking. And I'm definitely all about the looks when it comes to the car thing. And anyways, so I'd driven the Volt all the way to Colorado because that's where I'm from. I live in Michigan now. And I still, just like Lucas Sharon, if I saw there was a way that I could get to a charger, and make a lunch stop, I would do that. And so I would, but you're only going to get 40 miles. It in reality, it's kind of silly time frame, whatever. But just for the culture of it, I always try to plug in wherever I go. I think people need to see you doing it and they get more comfortable with it. And I always try to drive by the Charge America up there in Portage at Sam's Club. It's the only one we got close to me. And just I sent a picture to Carl this morning of last week when it snowed. There was a Mach E charge, and that's what I should have put behind me there, but I didn't get to it in time. But anyways, yeah, I'm needing to make the jump over to all electric, but money wise, I buy these like you can see in that picture there. That one was just rubbed by a semi truck, and I put 80,000 miles on it. They're super durable, easy to work on. And I guess that's kind of where I've been struggling. And the Mach E, when it came out, I was really looking and following them. And then the Model S, like Carl has, offers that free supercharging, the supercharging network. So I keep going back and forth because I think in repaired, which is what I would do, I'd buy one that's coming through a salvage pool that needs to be repaired. Which they're about the same cost, but there's different benefits. And so that's why it's great to hear. And again, I appreciate both you guys are really doing a good job about sharing your stories on Facebook.
Oh, thanks, Larry. So just to go back to a road trip, so the way it works on a plug-in hybrid, you basically exhaust the battery at 35, 40 miles, and then the gas engine just kicks in, right? So, and then you're just putting gas in it.
Exactly.
Now, if you can find a hotel, and this is what we do when we travel with my daughter, is we try to find a hotel with a level 2 charger, then she can plug in, and at least that first 30, 40 miles is going to be free, quote unquote. It was included in the price of the room, and then that's less gas that you have to buy. And I think the Gen 1 volts needed premium, so it's a little bit more expensive too.
Right. And I'm a single guy, so I'm doing the single guy thing. So when I go to Denver, it's 16 hours. I usually leave in the evening, so I just come through Chicago, after hours. And then I drive until I can't drive anymore. And I found a charger just off the highway, just out of Illinois, at an electric facility. I plugged in, and then I can fit in the back. I turn on camper mode, it's called, right? And so it was winter time, but I'm able to leave the car on, plugged in, heater on very low, and lay out in the back at 6'2" comfortably. Got little mats. You see all the little tricks online, and get a good nap in. And 5 hours later, I'm waking up. I got my 40 miles, but it also heated the car, kept me comfortable. So it's a win-win. And typically most all these are free. I don't think I think I stopped at 5 chargers and they were all free with that. But again, I'm only getting 40 miles. What is the volts really the charger, right? So that's something else people probably I'm still
the early ones were at 3.6 kilowatts. So, and then I think it was only the 2019, the Gen 2 had a 6.6. So that limits how quickly you can recharge the electric range.
Right.
I mean, for overnight it's fine, but on a road trip it's a little tedious for the older ones.
Right. But that's the interesting part is each car, right? It's the charger is actually in the car. We think when we're plugging in, it's the machine that's pumping the electric in, but it's not. It's the car that dictates how fast it can pull a charge in, right? Each car is different.
Right.
And I think Tesla is kind of leading the pack as fast charging. Maybe the Porsche Taycan, I think, also has a pretty impressive.
Yeah, also the Kias and the Hyundais now have the 800 volt battery architecture, which means that they can charge faster. So,
and I think GM's coming out with something new. You're going to have 2 ports. And so you'll plug in 2 cords and be able to cut your charging time down with that. And I thought, wow, never thought of that. And like Carl, I've been going to these EV meetings once a month with Professor Paul Pincel up in Kalamazoo, runs our current group, Kiva, right now. And we're always talking ideas, and it never came up. And all of a sudden, this came out of left field. And it's like, what a simple idea, but I think that's going to be exciting.
Yeah, and actually, my Zero electric motorcycle has that capability aftermarket. There's a guy named Scott Harkless who rides a Zero SRS, and he's an electrical engineer. And because the way Zero has chargers, they have two separate onboard chargers depending on which level of bike you got. And what he did is he basically outfitted it with ports for two different J1772 plugs, the level 2 chargers. So now instead of 6 kilowatt, you can charge at 12, which for a motorcycle is pretty amazing.
That is cool.
Let me come back to road trips a little bit, because Luke has possibly one more story he might want to share with us. I have a little bit of the inside track because he also posted this. So you took another trip to Minnesota, and I remember when you came back, you gave all the stats, and again, I love all that stuff. I eat it up. And at the end, your conclusion was, in retrospect, maybe we should have taken the ICE car. Walk us a little bit through the circumstances of that, and would it still be the same today, or was it the vehicle, was it the infrastructure, or was it just the circumstances where you said, you know what, it's not the leisurely family trip, I just want to get there?
Sure. Yeah, so that trip was a little was less of a vacation. It was we were making a medical trip over to Minnesota, and so we had a structure. We had to get there by a certain time, and we had left our children at home, and we have adult children, so thankfully they were able to watch that, and we did our thing, and then we were scheduled to come back at a certain time. We were leaving in early October, which, as you know, Michigan gets cool pretty early. So contrasting it to the trip we made back earlier, late spring, to New England, it was warmer. And so we were just learning. But we were able to, with your help, get around the lake shore. There isn't much charging around there, so you have to be a little creative at the moment. But once we got through Chicago, pretty smooth sailing at that point. It was on our return that the temps fell. Once we hit the lake shore, the differential temperature was about 20 degrees, and we had rain and wind. And we were still learning what it meant to drive electric in the cold, and of course with resistance. And so we had to charge several times and find, as you know, the lakeshore being kind of difficult, we had to be very creative. And so we found a couple of stops, but we just wanted to be home at that point. And we were tired, and I wanted to get around the lake shore before it got too dark, because fatigue just sets in. I think at the end of the day, what I learned now, processing it, a few months later, I think we would have done better if I would had optimized our HVAC settings in our car. So it was cold. We wanted to be comfy and warm. As you know better than I do, that running traditional HVAC in your car can deplete your battery pretty quickly. And so we were noticing that our range was falling faster than the miles we were traveling. And if we had just run our heated seats and steering wheel and just stay a little comfortable in the car, we probably would have had a little bit better trip around the lakeshore.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. I guess maybe one comment, people are going to hear that and say, well, gee, I have to run my car cold. Running your seat heaters and your heated steering wheel is amazing. And I've done that just because it actually feels more comfortable. It's direct heat. So I have a Bolt EV as a company car, and I'll do that. I'll preheat it, and then the car's nice and toasty warm when I get in. I turn on the seat heaters, and I turn the HVAC to off, and I can usually get through about an hour of driving before it's like, okay, the cabin's really cold and I'm starting to fog up the windshield and things like that. Fortunately, today's cars do have the heat pumps, as opposed to like my early 2012 Leaf had a resistance heater, and holy cow, that really sucked the battery down, and it already had pretty low range. So the cars are getting better with that. But yeah, that's a great point. Part of what depletes the battery or just makes it run down faster is that the battery itself is an electrochemical process. If it gets cold, it's just not as efficient. So there are also battery heaters that kick in to keep the battery warm and preheat it before you start charging and things like that. But let me segue with one thing, and to like, why would you not want to take an EV? So I think your mind, from what I heard, is where it was going is, okay, I think the next time I could do it better with the EV because of this. Now, there are going to be times, in my opinion, that you just say, you know what, it's not worth it for me to try and take an EV because I'm going to go into a place where I'm going to put myself in potential danger by running out of electricity in a place that doesn't have charging infrastructure, or it's just super inconvenient. I possibly had to face that on my upcoming road trip because we were stuffing 5 people into a Tesla sedan with lots and lots of stuff for the holidays. And I did entertain the idea of just renting a minivan. We used to have a minivan, and they are absolute road trip kings for comfort, cup holders, outlets, space galore. So, in my mind, there is a point where you have to say, you know what, the infrastructure isn't there yet, or the vehicles aren't there yet. And not that I want to tell people what to do, but in my mind, I'm thinking it's okay. It's okay if I take a gas car because we're just not there yet. I want to do the right thing. But I also want to travel comfortably. I'm still a human. So Larry, Luke, any thoughts on that?
Well, I know for me, I'm definitely I got my current Volt has the heated seats, did not have the Gen 1, does not have the heated steering wheel, but you can buy an aftermarket. And so I do throw both those in, and I try to run because the Volt is really harsh on you turn on the heat, there goes all your range. You'll use the battery up heating the car before you can use it up driving it, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. It doesn't seem to make sense, but that's how it is. So again, that first 40 mile, or well, in the cold months, it's more like 30 miles. And again, like Carl's saying, that steering wheel and heated seat is just a great little tool. And yeah, it works for me.
Yeah, I guess I would say that, to your question, which is it okay to use a different tool, so to speak, to do the work that you want to do? And I mean, I'm excited that you and I've had many conversations, Carl, about you don't have to make everything fit into the vehicle that you have. While I at once was resistant to doing a road trip in my car, and my wife pushed me into doing it. Now I'm a little giddy about trying to make a trip out to the Pacific Northwest. However, we probably will do that in a nice vehicle, just because you have to consider all the different variables. Who's coming with you? What are you trying to achieve on this trip? Do you have business? Do you want it to be for pleasure? Is it a mixture of both? Do you want the trip to be fun? And we've done this enough. We want the trip to be as fun as once we reach the destination. And maybe your hotels have some amenities that you want to enjoy, which of course you're going to lose some of that time if you can't get there as soon as you could with an EV. Obviously there are benefits to driving an EV that are very practical, and we get that. But for the short time you might be doing a trip of pleasure with the family, use the tool that makes sense to maximize that trip. I don't think anyone would say, I saved $150 in fuel for the benefit of not being at these hotels and enjoying, or wherever the spots that you want to enjoy. So, but if I was making the trip by myself, or maybe with a friend, and we said, hey, you want to try this experiment? It changes the whole game, right? It's all about how you frame up your the game that you're doing.
Yeah, you gamify it, right?
It's exactly. And so I find that when traveling with a family, my game is to make them as happy as possible so that I can be a happy driver. And it's for the memories, right? So, and if for some reason, if the EV is not going to promote that as much as another vehicle, it's totally worth driving a different vehicle.
Yeah. Good. No, I appreciate that perspective. And when I moved to Michigan in 2018 from Kansas City, so that's a 700-mile drive. At the time, we had a 2016 Nissan Leaf with about 90 miles of range, and I got some cost estimates to have it shipped up. And I'm like, you know what? I've got the time. I'm gonna drive it up. And at the time, you didn't have DC fast charging infrastructure, so it took me like 2.5 days to drive it up. But it was a fun experience, right? Planning it out and the places to charge. And I even charged at a campground at one point because they have the 50 amp RV plugs. Called ahead, talked to them, and said, I'm how much money would you like for me stopping here for 2 hours? And that was enough to get me into the St. Louis area. And then they had DC fast chargers. And then I was going on Route 66 byways because I didn't want to go on the highway because speed kills your range. So, I mean, it was fun. Now, if I had to say, well, gee, I just want to transport this vehicle and get it home as quickly as possible, I probably, with that mindset, I would have been miserable. Yeah, that's a great point. It kind of gamified, like how far can I go? And if I just slow down or if I turn the heater off and, I mean, those days are gone. We've since taken our Kia Niro that replaced that Leaf and we've taken on a road trip. It's not a Tesla, but it works just fine for a road trip and, one that my family is willing to do and not whine about sitting in a cold car at a charger.
Right. Just one other quick point about the desire to drive out west and to make that trip. While we're likely not going to do that in the next year or two, I'm sort of already engaged in the idea of doing it. I'm already checking the routes, seeing how the infrastructure is playing out, seeing what the apps are recommending if I were to make the trip, tomorrow or in a week, and schedule that out. And it changes. It tells me you can go this way or that way. I would like to go through the northern states like we usually do, which is a straighter shot, but the infrastructure's not there yet. And so I'm already engaged with Electrify America, pinging their support line, saying, hey, I'm excited to use your network more as we travel out west. What's your infrastructure plan? And they've been very responsive and sharing their updates. So at this time, even though we're not making that trip, one day we will, because I do have the desire to have some fun that way and bring the Mach E to my family and have them see the vehicle, because it brings a lot of appeal to people.
That's cool. That's a cool story. So building on that, if you, Larry talked a minute ago about, well, I'd like to maybe get this vehicle or that vehicle. So let me start with you, Luke, since you were started on this topic. If you had to pick out a road trip vehicle that, was maybe money is no object, maybe not a Remax. So, those are $1 million supercars, but let's say within the reasonable, if you had to pick out a car for a road trip, would you still consider the Mach E? Would you think about a truck? Would you think about something else, and why? And what are the amenities that maybe or the features of that vehicle that would make the road trip that much better?
Yeah, I think if we're looking for an EV to do road trip, and if family is not an issue, the size of the family and who needs to go, I probably would stick with a car that's budget friendly and with an 800-volt infrastructure. Could I get a Kia EV6? Because honestly, they look a little more attractive to me than the Hyundai, but I know to each their own. But those are such brilliant setup, I think, for the charging, provided that the 350 kilowatt station are available and that they're responsive to what your kind of feedback you're getting as you charge, and so you're getting that charging curve. So that's what I'd recommend, just because of charging, just simply you can get going, and they're really efficient. So you'll get the range you're looking for, and there's just a few little things I don't like about them, but again, they would still hit the top of the list if I needed to get that range and the charging speed.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. So one of the ones, I don't know if you've seen it, but I think you mentioned the Ioniq 5, which to me looks like a retro VW Golf. It's a little bit on the boxy side. But the Hyundai Ioniq 6, which is built on the same architecture, that one is a little bit more streamlined, and everything that I'm seeing, it's not on the market yet. Everything I'm seeing is it's even more efficient, which means you put together that charging. And for those who are not familiar, that 800-volt architecture allows those vehicles to charge from, what is it, 15 to 80%, I think, in 18 minutes is what they're claiming. Maybe it's not exactly 18 minutes, but it's probably 20, 25 minutes versus, a Chevy Bolt is going to sit there for an hour. That really changes the whole cadence once again. So the car will likely be done charging, uh, before you're done with your human necessities. So,
well, even if you don't need to fully charge, maybe you just need to get somewhere else and you can charge for 5 or 10 minutes and add a significant amount of energy. Yeah, it's definitely worth it.
So Larry, what's your aspirational vehicle on a road trip?
I've went all over the place, but of late I'm back to the Model S with the free charging, getting an older Model S, just money wise. And I know I've been researching the battery replacement's going to be probably the only issue. Um, so again, for budget wise, that's where I'm at. I did rent a Model Y through Turo. That's something we haven't talked about,
Hmm.
but that's something else that's cool that's come around. You can go out with this Turo app and between I'm in Three Rivers, so we're almost directly in between Chicago and Detroit. And it's the bigger cities, but Grand Rapids, South Bend, there's a Model S, there's the Model 3, there's a Model X that pops up on and off that you can go test those out. And then I haven't, to be honest with you, I haven't looked at anything else because I think the autopilot really intrigues me in the Model Y. That was my favorite part about it. I'm 6'2", about 240. And so the Y is easier to get in and out of. I have a couple friends with the 3, and I find that, I'm going back to where I'm with my Volt. Although I think the Volt, for whatever reason, I'm super comfortable in it. That was the only reason
Hmm.
why I'm still with it, is I can sit in that car forever and just, they did a great job. Super comfortable at my height.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm back at the S, just all over budget wise. I think we all were kind of touching on that. That
Hmm.
seems going to be um, the most practical. And then my son, I really want to get him in, and he drives a diesel truck. And so, right, with the younger group, it's the looks, and the S has just killed it, right? It's still the best looking car out there.
It's a good looking car. And yeah, the driver assist, I mean, I have the free lifetime auto supercharging, which is definitely nice. I think sometimes people put a little too much value on it because I still charge at home because, DC fast charging does wear the battery more on a more accelerated pace than level 2 charging does. Nonetheless, I have to admit it's a nice feature. That's the car I'm going to be taking on my road trip, so I'll be posting some videos on our channel about how that goes, so you can follow along. But you mentioned the autopilot, and right now the autopilot, at least for my vintage vehicle, is basically auto steer, right? It doesn't have the thing where you can just type in an address and it goes there, the self-driving, which also that's not quite completely hatched yet in my mind. But just to have that feature of not having to make the little micro adjustments as you're driving is huge. And our Kia has that as well. It'll stay within the lanes. And I'm sure, I mean, I rented a Toyota Corolla that had that feature to a limited extent, and it was pretty decent. But that's like the difference between having cruise control and not having cruise control, which is it really helps a full day's drive be much less fatiguing. So I'll go to my aspirational car, and that's it's actually two. It's more the style, the Volkswagen ID Buzz, which is the relaunch of the Volkswagen Microbus. And I used to have a 1985 Volkswagen Vanagon Westphalia with the full camper package and all that stuff. And then there's another vehicle that's very similar, and that is the Canoe lifestyle vehicle. And it's also looks like a van. And what I find appealing about this, because the way my wife and I travel, um, we would drive with that Volkswagen, and then we would stop somewhere. You pop up the little table. There's a little captain's chairs that rotate backwards, and you have a seating area, and then you just make your lunch right there. And so my thought was, if you're going to be stopping at a charger that's at a Meijer or a Walmart or a Hy-Vee or something like that, you go and you pick up your supplies, and you're not forever eating fried foods, or eating out and all that stuff. So you get your food, you make it, and if you have a vehicle to load outlet, in other words, where you can take energy from the vehicle and make yourself a cup of coffee, or even heat up water for some ramen noodles or whatever, and then you're there and you're hanging out, you're having lunch, and I mean 20, 30, 40 minutes is going to go by so quickly, and all of a sudden the car is going to say, okay, I'm at 80%, or I have enough charge to get to the next spot. And then you pack everything up, but you don't have to, you're already in your vehicle. You just unplug, stow everything, and get going again. And the same thing is those vehicles, at least the Vanagon that I had also had a bed in it. So Same kind of thing for camping. So if you decide, well, I don't want to spend the money on a hotel, why don't I just go to a campground that has a 50 amp RV plug that's definitely going to charge me overnight. It's going to keep my heater running overnight. And in the morning, again, your battery's full, and then you go off to another day and you didn't have to spend 150, 200 bucks on a hotel. Now, campgrounds are still coming around this whole concept. Some EV drivers kind of think they're getting a freebie, but in my mind, if the campgrounds start metering the energy and having you pay for it, it's probably a little bit more equitable. We don't want them losing money. We don't want them to be anti-EV. So, but nonetheless, the possibility is already there. And so that to me is kind of what would be the ultimate road trip vehicle. And as soon as the Volkswagen opens the order books for the ID Bez, I'm there. So we'll see how that goes. They're available in Europe, but they're supposed to be bringing out a longer wheelbase version here in North America. Anything else on road trips right now that you can think of? Any other pieces of advice? Oh, one just popped into my head. If you don't have level 2 charging at your hotel, DC fast charge before you go to bed. And the reason is, particularly in cool weather, if you wake up in the morning and your battery is now cold, a lot of battery management systems in cars will slow the charge rate down to a pretty low rate until the battery is heated up again. And so if you charge it while the vehicle is still warm, you're going to be charging much less time, and then you get up in the morning and you get on the road. So any others?
I was going to add to the Minnesota trip, and you and I talked about this before, Carl.
Mhm.
Where we needed to go, the only level 2 charging available were in parking garages, and we were already going to pay for parking at the hotel that we needed to be at, or there's a parking fee for that, and it didn't make sense to park further away from it and try to go find the car, and it was a bit of a premium to park over there. But I remember when I went inside to the concierge desk, and maybe it's just my personality, but I went up to them and I said, "Hey, so I don't know if you have any charging here, but I have an EV." And we started talking about it. And they're like, "Is that your Mach E in front?" "Yeah, it is. That's so cool." And I said, "Yeah, just looking to see if you could recommend a way I could charge my car." And I know they didn't have a level 2 charger, but the lady was gracious enough to say, "Well, we do have some plugs out there, as long as you have your own charging cord." And of course, I said what I thought most people thought was, "Oh, so you have a 110 plug out there?" And they go, "What's that?" So, I pointed to the wall plug on the where the someone would plug in the vacuum, and they said, "Yeah, we have one of those out there." So I said, "Yeah, if you could get me to one near there." I said, "Yeah, we know those numbers." I was like, "Perfect." So they hooked me up with a parking stall, and I plugged in with my level 1, and we were at 100% by the time we had to leave because we were staying for a few days. And so I think you coined this phrase or shared this on social media. Never underestimate level 1 charging. So one of
That's
these
right.
days I'll get that printed on a T-shirt, and we're gonna quote you on that.
Yeah, level 1 charging for the win. Hey, we lost Larry there for a while. Welcome back. But yeah, so I mean, it adds 3 or 4 miles of range per hour. Overnight you're going to get 30, 40 miles of range, and it keeps your battery a little bit warmer, and it can make a difference. So whether you're staying at a hotel or an Airbnb or something like that, or you're visiting family, I think the only thing that I try to work out is, and I try to do the math with people, say, this is going to pull 1.5 kilowatts, and so for 10 hours it's 15 kilowatt hours, and if it's 20 cents per kilowatt hour, which is pretty high, it's $3 worth of electricity. It's like, do you want me to put that in your tip jar? And most of the time they're like, get out of here. You're paying $150 for a hotel room, right? But that way people don't feel like, oh, they're somehow getting hosed with electricity cost. I have had bed and breakfasts where I asked about that. They say, this is an old historic house and we're not sure about the wiring, so we'd appreciate it if you don't do that. So that's cool. I understand that, but it's worth asking. And one other pointer there is, if you need to use an extension cord, make sure you use one that's the proper gauge. You don't want it overheating. The connector is good because you don't want to start a fire. You also don't want to create a trip hazard over a sidewalk or something like that. But if you can do it in a safe way that everybody's happy with, it's definitely worth doing. So,
Uh,
Totally.
Kim Java, I don't know if you guys come across her YouTube,
Hmm.
but she's got some pretty funny ones where her and her husband take their Model X, I believe, on family. And they got, they're breaking out RV cords and unplugging dryers and, really going the extra mile. Well, you got to get that charge, right? So,
Yeah, and I have a ton of adapters, and I'll probably be breaking some of those out on my road trip, and I'll put those in some videos of how they work. Yeah, it's good to be prepared. I mean, I have a friend who's an electrician who has a Model S, and he takes some raw wiring with him, and he's like going into an Airbnb and popping in a new breaker, and that's a little extreme, and you got to know what you're doing, and but but yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's just electrons, and it's how you get it into the car quickly and safely.
But I think when it comes to road tripping, I think the thing I learned most about it is have conversations with people. Just just break through the fear and have a conversation. Like the concierge desk, I don't know if they're going to be an EV promoter. I found out that of the couple people that were there, they surprised me. One was a car fan and had never seen a Mach E, and so it started a conversation. She hooked me up with a plug and got it charging. On our first trip over to New England, we were able to stop in Cape Cod as part of our visit, and they had level 2 charging available, but they were being used, and I couldn't have access to it. In fact, um, neither of them were using any sort of like notifications or stickers to show that, hey, you can unplug me at this time, feel free to do this. And we had talked about this before, Carl, and so I
Hmm.
actually left a little note on the person's inside their little in their driver's side window and said, hey, love your car, let me know if I can use it at some point, but no rush, and just try to be gracious and put my phone number. The guy sent me a text back in the morning, says, oh, I'm so sorry, I should have told you, because you got this message and you could have charged, and struck up a relationship. And you know that's a whole new relationship that I connected with them. But when I was there in Cape Cod, I noticed that there was a light pole, and I saw a little cover right there, and there was a couple of 110 outlets. So rather than plugging into it, I walked inside and I asked, hey, I noticed you have level 2 charging, that's great, but I can't charge because they're being used. But I noticed that there's this plug out there, and I don't know if I can ask you or ask your owner, is they're around. The owner was around. He came over, and he probably is not much of an EV promoter, so he was a little gruff, and he's like, I don't know. And then he finally said, if you can get it to work, I don't care, go use it. And so I went over, plugged in. Of course, it didn't work, but I realized it's a GFI plug. So I checked it again, popped the pin, and it started charging. And so I got 30 to 40 miles of charging overnight with that, and he was
Nice.
totally cool with that.
Yeah.
So again, just have conversations with people, because I think much of this EV life and experience doesn't it doesn't you don't transfer the information unless there's an opportunity to have a transfer of information. So just have conversations.
Yeah, that's great advice. And like I said, if I always try to make sure that I'm not giving the appearance of freeloading. So if I can drop a couple bucks in a tip jar, or go to a nearby restaurant and say, hey, I'm gonna buy a $5 or $6 latte or something like that, and leave a big tip, then people aren't thinking, oh, those EV drivers, they're just here to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to get a little bit of free electricity from me. So
right. Because I know what, like my Volt, if I arrive empty and in 3 hours it'll take out of 220, I'm going to get $1.60, as the most juice I can get. I think a lot of people, right, just because we're used to going and filling our cars up, so it's 30, 40, 50, $100 a stop, and they, you know what I mean. So I think they're thinking you're plugging in, it's going to be this big bill, but it's $1.60. And I even believe, right, on a 110, doesn't matter what you plug in with, it's not going to be able to pull substantial amperages. I was surprised. How long were you there? You were able to get 30, 40 miles with the Mach E?
Well, you know what we were talking about, if I can get 3 to 4 miles of range per hour of charging, and we were
Okay.
plugged in overnight, so let's say 10 hours.
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're gonna
yeah,
get
yeah.
about 1.5 kilowatts, so that translates into 3-4 miles depending on the vehicle.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. So again, that's about what, $1.60, give or take, right? Is the that
It depends on the rates of the region you're in, right? So utility rates are all over the place, I think.
But it's
that's
not like 10 or 20 bucks where the owner thinks that, they're going to get hosed
Right.
when you're there.
Right.
Well, this is a great conversation. I wish we could go on for another hour, but nobody's going to listen to a 2-hour podcast. So let me wrap up with a couple thoughts. I was hoping to squeeze in some EV news and some value added. I'll just say it real quick. Electrek, which is a website for electric vehicles, all this kind of thing. They named the Chevy Bolt EV as their car of the year, which is kind of interesting because it's not the highest technology, it's not the latest whiz bang, but I think it's democratized EVs a bit because we're now at a price point of around $25,000, and they're made here in Michigan at the Orion plant, so that's kind of local news. And then the other one that popped into my head since we were talking about level 1 charging is that the Muskegon Airport put in some level 1 chargers in their long-term parking lot. And I did a video on that on our channel as well, so you can dig into that. But I thought that was kind of neat because, like, who would do that? Like, why would you want level 1 charging? It's so slow, right? But if you think about it, if you're gone for 24, 48 hours for a week, who the heck cares how long it takes to charge? And then right now they have two, but I've talked to the folks about it, and they say, if this thing takes off, we'll just put some more because it's super cheap to put them in terms of the wiring, in terms of the actual EVSE. And I mean, you could even just put an outlet or something like that. So I thought that was kind of a cool thing. Any other quick EV news that local that pops into your head that's happening around the state?
I would share too that Monroe Live did a little bit on the newest Bolt out, and his wife was a fan of it just being simple and simplistic, right? And so he was a little bummed. He was hoping she'd want it, to go something cool like the Tesla, but she really enjoyed that and liked it.
Luke, anything?
I cannot share any local news because I'm still learning from you all. So
Okay, fair enough. And then value added section. So this is where we talk some product services, ideas that have added value in our personal EV lives. I'll start with this one. The city of Hart, Michigan had some ChargePoint chargers that for whatever reason went offline, stopped working. And a couple of us kind of whined to them about it and said, this is a really great location with a downtown walkable to some restaurants, to some coffee shops. What a great location. In fact, I discovered Hart Pizza because it was one block away from that charging station. Excuse me. They stopped working. So a couple of us, contacted them. Hey, is there anything we can do? Maybe from the EV community, if those things are broken, can we maybe, donate a couple of chargers? And without even a word, but I guess it just must have tweaked somebody. All of a sudden, it showed up back on the ChargePoint network, and they're working again. And for me, I love that route, especially on my Zero motorcycle, Oceana Drive, and Hart is just a great place to stop. There's Stella's Coffee Shop, again, Hart Pizza. There's a couple of really good Mexican restaurants in town. So that one's really added value to my life. Luke or Larry?
I got a good one real quick on that note. Is for about 5 years, the Celebration Cinema movies in Portage had chargers. And just like you said, it was just perfect in my route. But boy, the minute they came off a contract with ChargePoint, they put bags over all those. And I think across Michigan, I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, Celebration, but that's inspiring. I have reached out to management, and corporate just said it just hasn't made sense for them. And I know ChargePoint is pretty pricey, if you're contracted with them, and the same kind of similar issues at Western. So if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Well, my only thought is if you can do a rip and replace with a dumb charger that's not networked. So if they were giving away the electricity anyway and they weren't metering it, then, if you just put in a quality EVSE, I happen to like Clipper Creeks. They're US made, they're UL listed. They're pretty much indestructible. So if you just put it out there. Now, if you're looking to collect money from the charging, then it's a little bit different story. You pretty much have to network it, or, then you have to have some other funding mechanism, which then could,
Do you guys Celebration Cinemas by you? Have you noticed that with their
ours don't have one in Muskegon. We have two that's we have Cinema Carousel, I think it's owned by them, and actually the Getty Drive-In. Now it'd be really fun if they put some level 1 plugs in at the drive-in, but that's a separate discussion. But yeah, no, they've never had chargers in our area.
And how about you, Luke? Do you have any celebrations?
So there are several celebrations. I think at the one point I noticed that there were chargers at Celebration North in Grand Rapids, um, but I don't believe those are still there. I think those were likely Tesla destination chargers. So I guess while most people can't take advantage of a Tesla destination charger, thanks to Carl for recommending if you get the appropriate adapter, and I would recommend reaching out to the community or doing a little research to make sure you're getting the right one. But he recommended a fine adapter that maximizes my Mach E's DC setup. I can't really speak well to that. He could speak to that,
It's
but
AC. Yeah, the DC doesn't work. You can't use the superchargers, but the
I apologize,
destination.
but the
No, no worries.
onboard, I guess the onboard converter, DC converter, I think is what you were saying on the Mach E. Um, I guess I'm misspeaking on that point. To use the full 48.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's the onboard charger that Larry mentioned earlier. That
Yeah,
really that AC to DC. So level 2 power is still alternating current. The
right.
battery is DC. So that onboard charger that you don't, the normal person doesn't ever see is on board the vehicle. So it
Right.
takes AC to DC. What the Tesla adapter does is it takes the power from a Tesla destination charger, which are also AC, and turns it into the right plug for a non-Tesla, which is the J1772 plug.
Right. I guess what I was speaking to is the plug that you recommended maximizes the current that I could get from the destination charger, so I could take advantage of, let's say, I think
Okay,
three
I
and a half.
understand.
Oh, sorry, 11 and a half
Yeah,
kilowatts
yes.
of energy. And so, anyway, I just realized a few months ago in our area. So I frequent the Southeast Rockford area, just north of Grand Rapids, and in the Canonsburg area, that's the area I'm speaking to, they have some wonderful restaurants and shops there, Honey Creek Inn, the Bottle Shop, and they have 2 Tesla destination chargers, which I think just got recently added to PlugShare. So if you have the ability to use, I think right now they're doing 7 or 8 kilowatts, but it's a really nice feature to have. So
Yep. Good. All right. Any final words before we close?
I'm all good. Thanks for doing this, Carl and Luke joining us.
Yeah,
yeah,
Luke, go ahead.
I'm glad I could be invited, and I hope that my feedback is valued to those that listen.
Absolutely. I think you've already inspired a lot of people, and we'll keep that trend going. So thanks, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next episode.